Can you hear me all right? All right, let's go ahead and get started. To eat is to consume sustenance for nourishment, satisfaction, and pleasure. These three are in chronological order by the privilege and status of humanity. The majority of people in the world eat to live rather than having the luxury of prioritizing in such a way that survival is taken for granted. Eating is the primary source of survival for human beings. Therefore, it follows that any question about eating is inherently linked to prioritization and necessity. Because I strongly believe that we are failing as a species to prioritize survival for all, I stand resolved that humans should eat to live, not live to eat. Value is quality of life. Whichever side best upholds quality of life for humanity should win this round. Contention 1. Living to eat diminishes quality of life and basic survival. The phrase live to eat implies that eating is an end goal. It means working toward eating, to spend time looking forward to, planning for, and gaining the means of survival. Unfortunately, in the modern world, this prioritization means that very few people have the privilege of counting sustenance as a given. Instead, the majority of people in the world live in poverty and face starvation, working toward eating and being stuck in a situation where they have no choice but to live to eat. Contention 2. Living to eat is inefficient for the majority. Were people committed to eating to live, we would work in such a way that eating would be a basic standard of living. Instead, we live in a capitalistic society that keeps the majority of its members inefficient in sustaining themselves. Those at the bottom struggle to have enough to eat, prioritizing the production of food and profit for pleasure and satisfaction of the rich. Contention 3. Eating to live promotes recreation and creativity. Prioritizing sustenance as a base for life, rather than life as a base for sustenance, means time can be better spent. We are fully capable of moving beyond a world where humans spend the majority of their time obtaining food. Our resources allow for people eating to live. We can eat first, keeping ourselves alive, and then fill the rest of our time living. That is, resting, being creative, expanding technology and research, and taking advantage of improved quality of life. This is my stated case, and I would like to go ahead and turn it over to the negative for them to state their case.
Okay. Interesting points brought up. I think the only really point I really okay, the affirmative says humans should eat to live, not live to eat, and I'm just here to say that the should part shouldn't be on the eat to live. It doesn't necessarily mean that we absolutely have to live to eat. It just means that maybe we should feel more welcome to do so. We should not feel shame for wanting to live to eat. So I guess overall I would say I do think you should want to live to eat as an overall goal for human nature. The affirmative led to linking eating to a basic matter prioritization for survival for species, and I really do respect that view, but I don't think that living to eat diminishes quality of life, and I think it can really be tied the other way around. It's kind of easy to view things from our own viewpoint sometimes, where we do see in America this tying together of living to eat culture is directly tied to just capitalistic culture. And I see where you're coming from, but I don't think those two have to necessarily be tied whatsoever. I think plenty of non-capitalist societies or non-capitalist-based societies, at the very least, societies who have really drifted away from capitalism, still have really strong cultures of everything they do being centered around food. They are very privileged, and there is still work to be done to bring underprivileged people to be at that same level of enjoyment. But it is certainly fair to say that those societies that do have that, whether via capitalism or other means, are actually overall happier. They have more peace of mind, they have more free time, and it's something that's suited with their culture. Even low income and impoverished societies really have a culture built around cooking. It's something that's why all the modern cultures and first world cultures kind of have this now culture that can unfortunately lead to some things such as obesity in some countries in which it's not well regulated or not well enforced of how to eat healthily, but not in all of them that live to eat. Many cultures that live to eat still are perfectly healthy, and it's still part of their culture to just enjoy cooking with one another, and they spend all day doing it. And that's true for impoverished cultures as well, where that simple need, that driving force of I need to eat to live, has actually led to this desire to live to eat as well, because they find it's almost fun. It keeps the family together. It keeps friends together. It really motivates everyone to keep going. And I think it's what promotes a society to keep growing from an impoverished one to one better, even if it's capitalism can be to blame for many of society's woes, but it doesn't necessarily have to be via capitalism that one becomes a society in which you are living to eat, because it's really a matter of culture, and letting a culture flourish can often best be done through food. Go ahead.
All right, so in response to the negative case, just going to go on down the flow. She said that people who have non-capitalist societies still have free time, and I would completely agree with that, but my contention with that is that the planet is largely capitalistic, even in countries where the government may not necessarily be capitalistic and that there's an open, free economy. As a planet, the countries that are on top benefit from the countries that are on the bottom, and therefore the planet as a whole is largely capitalistic. And because this resolution is so broad, there's definitely a sense that we, in essence, as humanity, do live to eat rather than eating to live. And so to go on moving down, my opponent Megan mentioned that people should feel welcome to have pleasure in eating, essentially, rather than feeling shame in that. And I like to address that next of all, because while this is a fun topic, it is really important to note that whenever you talk about eating and looking forward to eating, that brings up topics like eating disorders and people who struggle with feeling like they should eat or shouldn't eat a certain amount or control exactly what it is that they're eating. And I completely agree that people should feel welcome to do so. And I believe that eating to live promotes that, because that has the health standards and the priority standards where you eat first and then you have the rest of your life to live. So to move on to the question of how having even low income or impoverished cultures center their cultures around food, I've recognized this fact, and I think that what they're doing is that they are living to eat, even in that sense. And if we were eating to live, we could promote more of that creativity, because it is commonly known that people who have the ability to invest in trying new recipes, to invest in different kinds of food, to invest in utilizing what they have around them are able to be more creative. And that's why we have such a variety of food in the world, and people who have less variety in their diet are the kinds of people who have to live to eat. And then the very last point that my opponent made was that about motivating people to keep going. And I think the important thing is that we are able to keep going when we can eat first, because that is where survival comes from, as I stated in my first speech. And so because of that, being motivated comes from.
So to try to address some of those points, the planet being largely open free economy is, I think, completely true and fair to bring up. And I think that that's I think a fair way to kind of characterize the entire planet and the overall then problem we have with poverty still being so widespread across the planet, and that being why so many cultures do not even have the chance to try to live to eat. But I think even the way we still keep framing it goes to show that living to eat is the overall better position to be in, because we at least this is how I keep leaning towards, is it still seems like the goal is to get a culture or society or a small group of people to be able to have enough freedom, time, food in their life to find flexibility in living to eat more so than they are eating to live. I would argue that we can kind of fight for everyone to have enough food and free time, even if capitalism wasn't the driving force to let them to do that. Even as of right now, we see capitalism running the world all around, and there is plenty of food on this world to feed everyone who needs it, like 3 times over. I forget the exact stat, but it is something like that. I mean, it is always astounding to see that statistic and to know that we're not doing enough to really feed everyone. But ideally, even if it wasn't capitalism driving it, if it was something else, some more socialistic state that the affirmative would more prefer, and I happen to as well prefer that, it would just only allow everyone to then have as much needed to then give them that freedom to live to eat. Which is more the side I'm really trying to emphasize with this debate. It's a tough title, honestly, to try to debate, but it's because I don't I'm not necessarily saying that people should want to live to eat, but just that they shouldn't feel like they have to eat to live. I feel like they should feel flexible to lean to the other side, that there's nothing wrong with living to eat. Because I think creativity is actually more so allowed to grow when you shift that mind frame, when you shift that even social paradigm to allow for that. And I do recognize the eating disorder problem, but if it was a more widespread belief that food is why we're all here, food is what let us keep going in the survival state, so we may as well make it as fun, we may as well really enjoy it. You can do that on a healthy note too. Perhaps we'd be able to tackle more of those mental barriers in a more serious note, rather than just making jokes of people with eating disorders, that is often done in the media, rather than just not misunderstanding them and dooming them to be on their own. Because whether you're in a culture that lives to eat or eats to live, they would not understand, they usually do not understand people with those eating disorders, and they do little to help them. And it is often the cultures that live to eat that do worse with that. But if we had a more global mind frame of we're all in this together and we all are just letting food keep us flourishing, allow us to keep growing creatively, then we'd probably see a more sympathetic side to people who don't identify with that, because it's more of a global point of being a human rather than it is just a cultural status.
All right, so I'm just going to go on down the flow here. Have two main points that the negative brought up, and so I want to just address a couple of things here as far as addressing the topic, because what I did was I presented definitions and a value that the negative did not refute as far as quality of life and understanding that eating is to consume. And I completely understand that this question of shame and whether people should or should not feel shame is becoming one of the crucial issues that the negative has presented so far. So Megan was saying that food is why we're all here, and if we were able to recognize that living to eat could be more valued, that we would be able to address those eating disorders and everything that is so widespread in our culture today. And I would refute that by saying, let's go back to the definitions that I originally presented. Living to eat means that you spend the majority of your time, the majority of your living, to work toward eating. And that is inefficient. It diminishes quality of life, and that specifically goes into what my opponent was talking about, shame. Because if you feel shamed for eating in a certain way, rather than eating to live and getting eating out of the way, and instead of working toward having a specific diet plan or working toward eating a specific thing, there are so many people who, because they are nervous or feel shameful about their eating decisions, they are in essence living to eat. Where psychologically, if we were going to address each of those disorders that people live with in the world today, we would be able to promote eating to live, because nutritionists and psychologists who deal with each of those things will, the first thing they're going to tell you is you must eat for the purpose of staying alive, whether that is because you're eating too much or eating too little. Eating to live is the reaction and the response as recognized in the medical world to those things. And so there have been a couple of times that the negative has stated that living to eat is the better position, but there hasn't been a real argument underneath that in relation to my definition. So what I would request from the negative is that if you do believe that living to eat is the better position, that is, you get freedom, time, and the ability to cook, all of those things that you have brought up, why is it that living to eat, that is spending most of your time working toward eating, is the better position?
That it cut you off because you ran out of time, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying. So I'll be sure to cut off early so that you have time to finish your thought in case I don't address it, in case I didn't hear you. But I think I got the gist of what you were saying. And I will point out that I do think I kind of probably missed that. I don't want to say missed, but I did not address that initial definition of living to eat means the majority of living spent toward eating. And that quickly translated into an argument about shame, which I have brought up earlier and you did as well. And I think the central point of my argument is that more shame is ultimately translated onto the average person when reinforcing eating to live versus living to eat. I think that there is that modern shame of the occasional person with an eating disorder when we have such a society focused on living to eat. And I recognize it's there, and I recognize that there's solutions that need to be there to address them. I think if we were to transition into eating to live, the average person would feel it would be a lot more often that someone would feel shame than currently when it is that someone with an eating disorder feels shame for not wanting to eat. Nutritionists and psychologists would suggest to someone with an eating disorder, well, you do need to do it just to survive, and that's worthwhile. That's fair, but the average person who particularly enjoys spending their day cooking, who thinks of it as a cultural item to spend with the rest of their family, who thinks that their family has been doing it for generations, and it's what is really the whole purpose of why we're here. If it's almost paying respect to what keeps us alive, is then really taking the time to turn it into something beautiful. It turns it into an art. It turns it into even a science as well. I feel like a lot of this topic is saying we shouldn't have hobbies because not everyone can have hobbies, and until everyone can have hobbies, then we should just feel bad for even having our own, which I know is a gross exaggeration of what you're saying. That's not necessarily what I'm trying to say, but the topic itself comes across like that because at the end of the day, it really is just trying to tell people, if you have the means to have more fun with your life, you shouldn't do it because we need to make sure that everyone's on the same ground first. And I think that's a negative way that just keeps everyone down. I think that if you have the means to be having fun, and if that includes food, then you should feel more encouraged to do so and not feel put down by society that says, no, we eat to live here and you shouldn't be taking any more time than that. I think you can do it nutritionally. I think you can do it, of course, non-nutritionally as well. And either one really gives people such joy and happiness in life that I feel that should be the ultimate goal of a society, is just improving happiness. And if it has to be done on smaller scales until it reaches the global scale, I think that's perfectly fine, because it's okay for each individual society to find their path to happiness, especially if it's through food, which is so rooted in culture.
Okay, thank you there. I'm switching between tabs so that I can type, and so no problem cutting me off there. I'm able to keep track of the time here. Okay, so to move down. The first thing was about the shame argument. You said that more shame transfers onto the person with living to eat. This still doesn't go into line with the definition that I presented, because with living to eat, you have you live for the purpose of eating rather than eating for the purpose of living. And so it's still, there isn't a lot of direct refutation as to why, underlying what that definition means to you, as far as, instead of just using the phrase living to eat. Like, I would like a little bit more explanation as to exactly what living to eat means for you, so that we can bring some more clarity into these rebuttals. And then you're saying that the average person who spends their time cooking makes cooking into an art. I completely agree. I love cooking. From how you're talking about cooking, I would guess that you also enjoy cooking. And for that, when you are eating to live, you have the ability to plan your cooking in such a way that you can actually do all of that. As stated in my previous speech, you can plan out your meals, and when you have the means to do that, then you are eating to live. And so it's not saying that cooking is a bad thing, or necessarily that living to eat even says that cooking, I wouldn't say that cooking is equivalent to living to eat. I would say eating to live promotes that recreation and creativity. And if you have that free time, and if you have that ability, then that cooking is completely allowed. And so the very last thing that you said was the topic comes across as shaming people for being privileged. And I would simply negate that by saying there is no negativity in demanding quality of life. If you are eating to live, then you've arrived on the affirmative position. So there's no shame in that whatsoever.
One thing that this topic is really reminding me of, and it's coming up, so maybe, of course, I haven't had dinner, so I'm also hungry, so maybe that's why I'm particularly passionate about this right now, but I'm also thinking about Thanksgiving coming up, and even in just the quick American context, Thanksgiving is definitely a holiday in which everyone gets off of work. I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people get off of work and off of school, and you get extra days off to travel to your family. And part of that extra day off is because, especially, this is almost a different discussion with gender, it's especially put on largely the women's side of families, but not always, just historically, that okay, you spend the day cooking until everyone has this awkward meal at 4 p.m. and you completely overindulge. And on the surface, as you explain it like that, it seems silly and unnecessary, but clearly it's a widespread cultural choice that America continues to choose to take. It's something that people still find more fun than stressful. People still find more encouraging and motivating, and as a great way to spend their break from work than anything else. So if they were able to have more opportunities like that. I mean, my family personally does the same thing around the holidays at Christmas, and then we find ourselves wishing that we could all just do that more and more. Like we could just spend more days spending the day as a family, cooking all day, even when you don't have to. You're not planning a meal because you're hungry. You're not planning 3 meals a day because you're hungry. You're just cooking excessively. And not every day would have to be like that. Some days you're just cooking because you want to see how different you can make a nutritional item or how non-nutritional you can make it. And topic of health could be there. You could talk about someone's physical health with that, but I think ultimately mental health is really made best when you allow someone that freedom with their hobby. So what you were getting at with even cooking, sure, you could cook to eat to live, but that really, I wouldn't even call that a hobby, even if you made it into one while you're doing it, because ultimately a true hobby is what you choose to do, not because you have to in any means, but because you really just want to. Unless, I would say with the one way of wording it other than being it would be like a necessity for your mental health, which cooking as an art and a science form can be that way. So I think eating to live still takes away the fun of a hobby, and that's why I really resolved that living to eat. The why that you were asking for is because it just reinforces an element of fun that is one of those tiers of what it means to be a human being that goes largely I don't want to say ignored, but it's not acknowledged enough. There's really no point to living if we boil everything down to food, water, and shelter and then say, why are we bothering with anything else? Even if we spend time with those needs, we have to recognize life is kind of sad if we don't make it fun for ourselves. And one of those ways to make it fun can be living to eat as a individual, as a family, and as a society. And that's why I see that why there, is because it keeps people going on a human scale that shouldn't go ignored.
All right, perfect. So this is going to be my last speech. It's going to be the affirmative conclusion. So I just want to go ahead and recap my contentions and talk about how the negative has not directly addressed a lot of those. So just to quickly recap those, I said that living to eat diminishes quality of life and basic survival. And we've largely looked at quality of life as far as shame and creativity, but we haven't really talked much about basic survival. She didn't really address whether living to eat is efficient for the majority. And we haven't been able to talk a lot about eating to live promoting recreation and creativity, except just seeing cooking as a hobby rather than other recreational activities for people who may or may not enjoy cooking, people who want to spend their recreation doing other things. So I would like to respond to that Thanksgiving argument. Thanksgiving is fun if you have a family and the privilege to live to eat, which is unfortunately, like, that's not a shame thing. It's fantastic. That is exactly what I'm promoting as the affirmative, is that as long as you have that ability, then those activities can be a lot of fun. The negative said that life is sad when we don't make it fun for ourselves. I can completely agree, which is why if we eat to live and make food that primary necessity rather than having to live for the purpose of producing for ourselves and having food so that we can actually make it and have all of those things, then we will have the ability for that recreation to make life fun. She said that hobby is what you choose to do, not because you have to. Eating to live takes away the fun of a hobby. As I said before, awesome. You're making a case for the affirmative position. And all of that said, I believe that I have made a strong case for the affirmative position. Humans should eat to live, not live to eat. And then because the negative has the ability to go ahead and close up the remainder of this round, I would just like to say if there's anything else that she brings up that I haven't had the opportunity to respond to, take it with that grain of salt, that I have given definitions and stuck to them for the majority of the round.
Yeah, overall, I think biggest argument it diminishes the quality of life to eat to live or to live to eat. And I think there's lots of different ways to measure quality of life, obviously, so it's really kind of hard to boil it down to that. But certain nations and cultures and societies certainly get credited with a lot higher qualities of lives than other. And I'm not even talking America here. A lot of the countries that our favorite guy Bernie Sanders likes to do when he waves his hands around is talks about many of the socialist countries that are always credited with having some of the highest qualities of lives in terms of just how happy they report themselves being, how well their education system is run, etc. They also have really strong culture centered around food, centered around living to eat, because it is just such a core family mindset that everything they do is to get to the next step. Again, I even joked during this whole debate that part of what's motivating me to get this done right now is I'm like so hungry and I can't wait for dinner. And I'm like, this topic isn't helping. But it's a good thing. I'm like excited to go have dinner after that, and that's a good emotion that I'd rather be feeling than not. I don't want to feel like I'm just having to have dinner because it's just what everyone does at a certain time of night, and then you go to bed. So I think the quality of life is elevated by the notion of living to eat, because it gives people things to look forward to, things to spend their time on, things to relate to their family with, more so than eating to live does. Even if eating to live does those things, it doesn't do it enough. It doesn't really integrate it enough to really make quality of life high enough in comparison to what it could be. Because ultimately, I think there's a standard that all of the world could really, at the end of the line, reach if they all work together in the right ways, capitalism aside. I mean, there's many different ways that we could, as a global society, work towards a more just and equal global population. And ideally, I really do see a way that everyone integrates their cultures that they have now, both in first world and third world countries, and still allows that to proliferate and flourish in a ultimate modern society in which everyone has enough food and enough free time to say, I can't wait to have dinner tonight. This is my goal for the day. I am definitely getting through this day of work so that I can go have food with my family, because it's a really cultural, intimate bond that people can have with one another. And so living to eat is the way to solidify that bond that ultimately elevates quality of life, that is clearly envied by some countries over others. I see it as an ultimate goal that we can achieve for ourselves, and there's no harm in doing so. It is my ultimate resolution.
All right, I believe that concludes the debate. I see that we still have about 2 minutes and 30 seconds left on our timer. So go ahead and finish it up. It was really fun debating you, Megan. I look forward to seeing more of you around on QallOut.
Same. I don't know how to, I'm going to say end debate.